we're going to get started. Good afternoon, students and colleagues. It's so great to see so many of you here. I'm Dr. Rebecca Ingram, Professor of Spanish, Director of Interdisciplinary Humanities, and affiliated faculty in USD's brand new Food Studies minor. So this is a thing that just started last fall, and we are delighted to have a lot of events that are happening this academic year that are related to that new minor. And today is one of those events. It's my delight to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of a new speaker series at USD, sponsored by our Center for Food Systems Transformation. This series highlights how interdisciplinary food studies advances broad understandings of the cultural, material, and ethical dimensions of food systems to provide a basis for the university community to discern its values and take action in transforming food systems on campus. We have the pleasure of having on campus today Dr. Bob Davidson. Bob is Mary Rowell Jackman Professor of Humanities, Director of the Northrop Frye Center, Victoria College, and faculty in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at University of Toronto. In addition to shepherding field-defining projects through to publication as founder of the Toronto Iberic series at the University of Toronto Press, and I'm going to take a pause here to recognize Dr. Martin Repinez, whose book comes out with this series this week. The book is called Volatile Whiteness. Yay, Dr. Repinez. Bob is also a gifted and creative scholar of Spain and Catalonia. His first book, Jazz Age Barcelona, was shortlisted for the 2010 Canada Prize in the Humanities and is required reading for any project that deals with the cultural and political dynamics of modern to contemporary Barcelona. His second book, Hotel, The Occupied Space, treats the hotel as a, quote, cultural and built edifice that is a ready-made conduit for transculturation. A foundational voice in the growing field of Iberian food cultural studies, Bob's research and publications on cava, that lovely bubbly drink that is delicious that I'm sure many of you have tried or will in the future. His work has highlighted how this drink exemplifies clashes between territorial identities within Spain and also at the EU level. His talk today is entitled Smelling the Humanities. And yes, you're going to be smelling and tasting, so get ready. After Dr. Davidson's formal presentation, we'll have time for a Q&A session. Then I invite you to join us for a reception with plant-based treats from Split Bakehouse. This plant-based reception reflects the benefits of plant-based choices for addressing climate change, cultivating inclusivity, and aligning food choices with the university's commitment to Laudato Si. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Davidson to campus as part of the Center for Food Systems Transformation's work in embodying our values in food and through supporting sustainable diets through behavior architecture. I also thank the Humanities Center, Lindy Villa, and Dr. Brian Clack for their support. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bob Davidson.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's fantastic. First off, let me express my deep thanks to Rebecca Ingram, Martin Rebinetz, the program in Interdisciplinary Humanities, and the Center for Food Systems Transformation, to everyone who's come out on this Tuesday afternoon, which apparently is cold here for you, or is watching online at some later date. Thank you very much for your time. Now, when Rebecca told me to talk for 3 hours, my first thought was, wow, okay. So here goes. No, I'm kidding. But as always, I will endeavor to subscribe to the first rule of keynote or invited lecture: do not be boring. We don't truly appreciate our sense of smell until it's temporarily gone. Yet, even still, it doesn't get much respect. In the hierarchy of the senses, sight's reign has been indisputable, with hearing following close behind. Meanwhile, smell and its erstwhile companion taste have long been treated as an afterthought amongst the humanities. Smell, on account of its ineffability, a lack of dedicated vocabulary to describe it, its gender coding in moral issues, and its long perceived connection to illness and disease. Taste, because food and drink couldn't possibly be serious subjects, and because kitchen work, of course, has always been devalued, once again on gender and class grounds. Things need to change, though, so smelling the humanities it is. Okay, I admit that my title is a bit weird, but that's exactly the point. Other versions sound normal, even cool. seeing the humanities, thinking the humanities, even hearing the humanities. The alliteration helps, right? But tasting, feeling, smelling the humanities, it's like we're doing something dirty. And actually, we are coloring outside the lines, aren't we? By activating those senses in such an unanticipated way, we move into a space where the metaphors change just enough that we become aware of how vision-centric things really are. While the common notion of seeing is believing has dominated Western thought for centuries, we are slowly becoming attuned to other ways of knowing, something that is clearly patent also in the gradual opening up in the West to indigenous epistemologies. And actually, in an age where increasingly we cannot trust our eyes, I would venture that smell tells us quite a lot in any given moment. And if you stop and think about it, it's a deeply powerful sense that can evoke instant physical responses in us, both good and bad. And as a result, profoundly shape how we interact in social spaces. And you just have to think back to a time when you've gotten on a bus or a subway and perhaps someone who hasn't bathed in a while is on that bus. Our instant reaction, right, is to move away. And so smell is very powerful in how it conditions us socially. And while, and as COVID-19 has unfortunately made clear for many, especially the first couple variants of it, smell is a part of our lives that we often take for granted. And while Proust's Madeleine famously connected taste to memory, the actual phenomena of how we savor things and why emotions lock in sense with such power to transport us through both space and time has been linked directly to our sense of smell. Research in olfactory culture is a field on the rise across the board, from the humanities to bioscience. Now, let me be the first to point out that I'm speaking under an umbrella of ideas that have been a large part of the work of many stellar scholars and educators for decades. Constance Classen, David Howes, Carolyn Korsmeyer, Anthony Sinnott, Jim Drobnik, Alain Corbin, and Laura Marks have all paved the way for lesser scents such as smell and taste to be considered seriously by the Academy. But while academic vogues can often be cyclical, think of the many fashionable turns that occur every few years, what does change, quite radically, is the context in which we live and teach, especially regarding tech in the classroom, and more recently, large language models. By now, we all know the easy convenience of a Zoom lecture or a call, but if pandemic teaching taught us one thing, it's that the humanities needs humans. Being together changes the way we do things, the way we learn things, and to put it into sort of academic ease, it's a multisensory mode of communication and exchange that allows for nuances that technology has not yet been able to replicate. Reading Alonso Quijano's Self-Creation of Don Quixote together or discussing the death of Emma Bovary are patently different when you share the same space. But that said, as my colleague Dan Bender is fond of observing, the hierarchy of the senses is still in full force at the university. In a typical classroom, you're really only allowed to do two things: watch and listen. No active feeling, no tasting, and no smelling, although today we're going to break two of those. And that, I argue, is what we need to change. In the face of declining enrollments, attacks on the so-called utility of the humanities, justify, measure, and the rise of the virtual and AI, it's more important than ever that we destabilize this hierarchy and incorporate smell and taste into both our research and our teaching. By doing so, I believe that we can activate ourselves and our students in novel ways, and through a process of perceptual enrichment that promotes sensory subjectivity both in and outside the classroom, together contribute to transformative and transformational learning. And I borrow the concept of perceptual enrichment from Lachance, Aimant, and Vinit, and their idea that it helps people be in their body in a different way through conscious awareness in a pedagogical setting as well. And at the same time, as we come to realize that perceiving and understanding sensation is a category of work that is distinctly human and requires humans for its development. I know there are AI researchers or budding AI researchers here today, and I'm interested in your thoughts on physical perception and the human, especially as machines are increasingly trained to take on these tasks. Sociologist and educator Jackman famously theorized transformative learning as a way to combine individual growth and social development such that we collectively humanize our worlds by recognizing the oppressive, unfair, or unsustainable aspects of the discourses by which we live. Now, I'm not saying that smell and taste can do this sort of heavy lifting on their own, but what I am suggesting is that the type of sensory learning for which many of us are advocating can contribute to a broader understanding of context, which is part and parcel of the stronger sense of community that emerges in Mesereau's model. By facilitating understanding or knowledge transfer through a more synesthetic or intersensorial framework, I believe that we can contribute to transformation in ourselves and in our students. And you know what? Change doesn't always have to be painful or disruptive. It can involve what I call hedonic empathy, right? Instrumental and communicative learning can add and expand, especially in olfactory and taste situations where we cast off the asceticism of the academy. And oh my God, the academy is so ascetic, right? No pleasure. And our understanding of context is thus broadened and challenged by direct sensory experience that in turn makes us more aware as embodied sensing subjects. So let's insist on the human in all our senses and keep this transformation or this transformative element in mind as we go along. And remember, it's okay to enjoy what we do. All right, let me first point out that the title slide was created by that little mini designer, that little AI designer embedded in PowerPoint. And I kept it because I think it tells us something about what associations the machine assembles around these terms. And here it looks like someone has blown their nose on the slide, maybe in a humanistic way, I don't know. And now check out the alternative that it gave me for smelling the archive too. So this is the first one. This is sort of normal. And then here's what it gave me. And what we're seeing for the visually impaired, it's the nose of a cat smelling with the terms. All right, we'll go back to the normal one, which is a picture of file folders. Smelling the archive means not only approaching traditional archival material from new angles, but also being open to radical change in what we imagine an archive to be. Let me talk about both briefly, and then we can smell something that I found and I've used in class. The first notion entails approaching archival material from a new sense. And I'm tempted to say, look through a different lens, but I'm trying to cut back on the visual metaphors, right, that I use. But it's really hard. And being open to using synesthesia as a method for investigating meaning in new forms. Now here, Mark Smith's intersensorial approach to history underpins the way in which we can look at what has been deemed worthy of preservation, and through its absence, that which has not. And I've got a slide up of the cover of his book, A Sensory History Manifesto. By challenging the manners in which traditional archives are reduced or limited to dominant senses, we change the chip, cambiar el chip, as the Spanish say, and open ourselves to alternative archival findings and the production of a dialogue that generates a practice of intersensorial humanities inquiry instead of an assemblage of discrete methods, which of course is fine for traditional needs and means. But what I want to stress here is that arguably all archives have a multisensory potential. Just because it's a photograph, for example, doesn't mean it's a strictly visual archive. In this way, synesthesia comes in as a methodology when we seek to interpret senses via others, and by accepting how the senses blend in our experiences, both past and present. Now, I think we can normalize this type of inquiry by recognizing that in many cases, we may already be doing it, especially in cultural studies, but it would be productive to do so more mindfully. Okay, that's cool, you may be thinking, but why? So what if things are limited? Why is this important? Let me tell you what I think after I drink this gin. That's good. It's important because in limiting the ways in which we consider our collective experience as held and organized by archives, we have been effectively alienating parts of ourselves from ourselves. By valorizing only one or two types of sensory experience as knowledge vehicles or as knowledge tout court, we have limited our range of understanding and foreclosed on deep sensations like smell and taste that comprise an incredible amount of our daily experience, right? Think of all the things you smell and taste during a day and make up a wealth of knowledge that we don't even consider knowledge, right? So let's ask weird questions of the archive. Let's see what we find when we adjust our sensorial compass just a tad. I encourage all of you to think of how training a so-called lesser sense on something you already know very well can provide a new perspective or validate or activate or unearth a different way of understanding something. Smell and tastes communicate things that can be hard to put into words because we're not used to doing so. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. My favorite example is to think of the smell and taste of a good tomato, right? We all know what that means. Like, you know what a good tomato is. There's a sensory and a somatic effect of a good tomato. Now, in February in Toronto is hardly the best time for tomatoes, right? I had a couple good ones this last few days here in San Diego. You're in California. You're blessed to have these sorts of access to great fruit and veg all the time. But think of everything that's communicated by those senses engaging with that tomato. At first, it seems hard to articulate, but there are many elements that are easy to bring into discourse, such as the tomato's origin, the varietal, our memories of tomatoes in general, how it builds other flavors, like umami, its possible cultural significance, along with freshness, ripeness, its actual flavor in the mouth. And actually, this is making me think of the seed banks, right, in the Arctic Circle, as archives of smell and taste in their own right. Now, in the case of my present research on the smell of Spain in the 20th century, this different approach to the archive means specifically seeking out what I call olfactive adjacent material related to the Spanish modern experience in conventional holdings. Things like print media related to product promotion, manuals and legislation, as well as representations of scent in art. The task when working with these types of materials is first to identify them and evaluate whether or not or how an intersensorial approach might contribute to a deeper interpretation of what they may offer solely on a visual level. And of course, when we're dealing with digitized things, like, as we know, you're at the mercy of who is doing the digitizing, right? Sometimes they say, oh, you can't have we're not sending you the original, it's been digitized. But if that person was hungover that day, or just forgetful and missed a page or something, then, well, that's why we always have to always go to the archive and check. Excuse me. So once we've done this a few times, it's possible to pinpoint recurring tropes and aesthetic or rhetorical techniques related to issues of class, gender, race, and especially during periods of dictatorship ideology, and see how they also inflect our understanding of smell in the past. So, if the first part of this sensory approach to archives that I'm describing is open to the rich sensorial valence of traditional fond, the second brings into question what constitutes an archive in the first place. Here's where material culture scholars have been playing for a long while, and where those of us interested in smell particularly are able to go for firsthand experiences of the different texts that we study. I'm talking, of course, about so-called extra-institutional archives, like flea markets, antique shops, online sellers like eBay or Todo Colección. And I'm also interested in those weird niche company factory museums. Like Spain has a lot of these little kind of smell museums, but you'll have to invite me back if you want to hear about them. In these informal archives, one can find a wide variety of materials, sometimes organized, oftentimes not, all part of the detritus of daily life. Objects that have been relieved of use value and are now subject to a new market, that of the collector. Now, because smell is a time machine, it allows us to inform and connect our sensory perspective in a direct, vital way to the past. This is especially useful and effective in the classroom. Smelling together elicits a wide variety of responses, not unlike reading together. And while elaborating on context is helpful, the raw experience of scent is intensely subjective. Now, since you've been a patient audience, let's combine both aspects of smelling the archive and put our noses on a very interesting perfume from the 1920s. That's part of my book project on scent in Spain. At the same time, we'll have a look at how this particular company sought to express itself visually and physically, and this is the synesthesia angle. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray these, and then we'll pass them out. So have a smell. And what I'll give you some tips on how to smell. So if you want to maintain, because our nose gets tired really quickly, what you can do in order to keep it going is sniff like a dog, and you'll see how it prolongs the scent. And then if you want to, you know how when you're at a duty free, there's always coffee or something? Forget about the coffee. Smell yourself. If you want to reset your nose, smell your own clothes. So just take a minute, smell that, and then talk to the person next to you about what you smell. And what, if anyone, is anyone here from Spain? For those of you at home watching later, I'm sorry. Are we good? A few more? Okay. So this is called Maderas de Oriente, and it was made with cedar from Lebanon, Arabian sycamores, and sandalwood. This sample we're smelling is from the 1920s. So what's the impressions? Yeah. Okay, grandma. Everyone else think grandma? We were talking about doctor's office. Doctor's office. Okay, yeah. Barbershop, so some soapiness there, right? Anyone else? Other, yeah? A hotel. Oh, interesting. Now, the thing about when people say, yeah? Baby powder, there's some powder in there. Yeah? Anyone else? Anyone have an emotional response? Yeah? Antiques, so that idea of age. Again, well, it is almost 100 years old, right? Now, the thing about age, and there is sort of this, there's a pushback against sort of ageism, because sometimes people say, oh, it smells like old lady. But we need to remember that the old lady, when she was wearing this, would have been in her 20s, late teens, 20s, going out, right? And so this would have been something, kind of, and then we're going to talk about the idea of exotic too. But it's also got sandalwood in there. It's officially described as a floral aromatic, a little bit soapy. Originally, it would have had top notes of bergamot. Is anyone here into perfume? No Fragrantica? If you're into perfume, you can go on fragrantica.com and it tells you the top notes, the middle, the heart notes, and the base notes. And the top notes are the ones that burn off very quickly, and often they're citrus, right? So this originally would have had some bergamot, orange, and maybe a bit of coriander on the top, but that's long gone. It's too old now. And what we're left with are these base notes. And we've got carnation in here, a bit of iris. There's some Bulgarian rose, maybe you smelled, and less sandalwood than one would expect in a maderas, right, with musk under all of it and a bit of vanilla, okay? And inside each bottle, they put a little piece of sandalwood to get people to buy, right? But this was it was a very successful scent. And here we can see a couple ads on the screen. There's two ads. One is the Maderas de Oriente. It's for one of their eau de colognes, but it also shows that they do lotions, extracts, and powders. It was created in 1918 for Mirugia by Lucien Messonnier. The ribbon on the tree in the image on the left says, each bottle contains the seductive appeal of the dreamy East. And the ad on the right invokes, quote, exquisite nostalgia, thus suggesting an already existing scent memory, or is it simply a call out to a more esoteric, imagined olfactory past? Here is how it was originally bottled. So they would have, when you think about, I've got one of these, but I didn't bring it. But the tassel, it's very sort of Byzantine. It's made of sandalwood itself. And then they changed as it went from that sort of older style to the Art Deco style. And it's the same juice in there. I've got both of these. But you can see how as it goes along, it's reflecting the sort of aesthetic of the time. So when we think about it, how do these archival pieces smell, right? And if we've just been lucky enough to smell And now we're going to think about how it's been sort of marketed. Let's see if that question can take us beyond where traditional historical or print culture approach might, with its inquiry into artists and styles, etc. For instance, with more time, we might ask, when were certain scents mainstream? What did sandalwood mean in the Spanish context? And given that traditional archives do not preserve olfactory materials per se, we need to triangulate, take something from a dossier and connect it to other holdings. In this way, a simple ad for an eau de cologne can take us to the patents archive or the collection where brands are filed. And I will always shout out to Renee Congdon at Princeton for that tip, which led me to go to the brands archive in Madrid, which is fabulous. And that in turn might give us foundational drawings, chemical formulae, narrative descriptions, components that, when combined with all of the other ephemera and materials, we can sort of build an olfactory image. More specifically, from the fragrance's paratexts. The paratexts are all the things that are around a text, right? In a book, a paratext is like the blurb, the cover, all that stuff that goes around it. So the paratexts here around the perfume are the packaging, the way it's described, things like that. We can infer, and even its name, that what we are smelling was once coded as exotic and sensual. And thus, the question that comes to mind from a cultural studies perspective, context, is that what does it mean that a Spanish perfume house would adopt the same orientalizing perspective that had been trained on the entire country by Northern Europe that saw Spain as its own form of exotic other? So Spain was always sort of seen as this other place, right? Southern Europe, and I'm thinking here more like not only of the Carmen image, right? That sexualized Spanish woman, but also earlier notions that held Spain to be, in Bolufer's words, quote, a liminal area which could trigger the imagination and be perceived as a borderland between Europe, Africa, and the Orient, end quote. And it appears that in the case of Mirugia, there was a further east, a plus orientalum, that they imagined in olfactory and design terms. In the form, they also did other products called Hindustan, Morisca, Rosa de Baghdad, and the one that you've just been smelling, Maderas de Oriente, woods from the Orient. On the one hand, I find this sort of use of the orientalizing impulse to be really telling. I think this displacement of the othering corresponds to the aspirational element that perfumery taps into. So my question is, does olfactive European modernity entail or require imagining how a fantasy East might not only look, but also smell like? Does then offering that olfactory image to a domestic market serve as a way of recentering oneself from a peripheral position? Spain was periphery, right? And of course, everyone wants to be part of the center. France was the home of perfume. So maybe if Spain wanted to be modern in an olfactory sense, they have to act like, oh, there's another other somewhere else, right? That's my theory here. This sort of, also thus at the same time providing a sort of olfactory cover for Spain's own disavowed Arabic legacy. Because remember, Spain was trying to forget at the time, for a long time tried to forget the Arabic legacy. What does the success of this mean? And then on the other hand, I think that actually smelling the product definitely makes the exercise more immediate and important in ways that I think we're all still trying to articulate, right? What does it mean that we just smelled that and now are thinking about what it was to be exotic at the time, right? What's in that smell? How does it transport us, right, back in the past? Even though we're out of its time, having access to even part of the fragrance's smell allows us to feel this archive in a different yet compelling way, I think. Okay. Now, tasting the text. And here again, after trying to augment our sense of smell and apply it in new ways, the move to taste promises to be less complicated, right? However, while the idea of tasting the text, and here we have the PowerPoint AI's designer's impression of those words, right? Again, and we're seeing a typewriter key on the screen. This may seem, so a little more conventional. And in this case, I think the AI, the designer was thinking, oh, just open your mouth and let the typewriter key hit your tongue, right? Taste, though, still has trouble gaining traction both as a subject, mainly when attached to food, less so as an anthropological phenomena, and as a methodology for exploring our world and better understanding how it informs our existence. Although I'm thrilled to hear about the food studies here. And of course, I hope you realize that your Professor Ingram is, I like to help, but she's at the forefront of this. Tasting the text, though, is catchy, and it's been used as a metaphor for studies of cookbooks and cuisine history. It can also be literal, but don't worry, I'm not going to make you drink the perfume next. By savoring our subject, we gain new insights in the form of sensations that are above and beyond traditional approaches to learning. Sensorial pedagogies such as smelling, cooking, and tasting, I would argue, can readily contribute to a better understanding of the material and sensorial contexts that make up culture. Of course, promoting this take means getting past the folkloric stigma that many in academe attach to the study of food and drink, and this is especially bad in the modern languages, where food really has been treated as an ossified marker of culture, impervious to change. This folklorization goes hand in hand with the pejorative gendering of food-adjacent activities and a concomitant undervaluing of kitchen labor, to which I'll return. First, though, I thought we might enjoy doing our own tasting of something that is both incredibly basic and quite divisive, water. And we're going to taste Vichy Catalan, mineral water to be precise, and this is part of my ongoing work on terroir. And if you don't know this water, you're in for a treat, or at least a new experience. So let's pour. Okay, so let me just briefly introduce this and then give you a little primer on how its qualities and taste came to embody the way in which urban appetites have consumed the rural on both the literal and symbolic levels in the area of the world that I study, Catalonia. Okay, so first off, Vichy is a loaded word. At once a place, a treasonous regime for many, and a category of sparkling water. Those 5 letters do a lot of heavy lifting. You want some? Okay, let's go straight to the tasting, actually. Comments? Have a taste? Has anyone had this water before? Yes? Impressions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so salty. Anyone else have?
It's given like Alka-Seltzer vibes.
Okay, Alka-Seltzer. Does anyone feel better? Yes. A which? Citrus. So you got some citrus. Anyone else? How about the cup? Yeah? It's making you hungry. It's funny, I gave some of this to students in Bologna, and they hated it. The Italian said it tasted like it was like medicinal. So they thought it was very medicinal. Anyway, salty. It actually, if you drink 2 big bottles of this, it's the equivalent of a Big Mac, or 1 big bottle is the equivalent of 2 Big Macs for salt. But there's also good things in. Now you can see, science students, there you go. So the fact that these 5 letters mean a lot, right? But the story of this Vichy Catalan begins in the 19th century with a physician from Girona, north of Barcelona, and his name was Modest Forest, which is a great name. Name your puppy that, Modest Forest. He noticed that water coming from a forgotten well near Caldas de Malavella had some special properties. The area had been renowned for its thermal waters since the Romans established a colony there called Aquae Calidae, but it had fallen into disuse. Forest engaged multiple experts from the growing city of Barcelona to analyze the water, and the results pointed to a wide array of possible applications. Not only did it apparently possess anti-inflammatory properties and was suitable as a digestive aid, but it could also treat skin ailments, stimulate the appetite, and help other chronic conditions. So if you feel the need to bathe in it, wait till later, but you can apply it to things. What is more, a geologist established physical parallels between the region where they found this and the Auvergne in France, where Vichy was an already well-established spring site, thus bestowing this extra cachet to it. And in this way, the seeds for an entire wellness empire were sown. And so you can go visit the spa. There's the old spa and then the new. So I'm showing pictures of the spa and a couple trucks. One has the Bici Catalan, the old logo, and the new here. Okay. So it's a miracle water then. You're welcome. You're probably wondering, okay, but what makes it so special, right? Its terroir, right? The taste of its place or where it comes from is interesting. Also, the combination of the mobility of the source water combined with the mineral content of the earth plus time. The water that emerges at the spring comes from rain that falls and is then filtered by the ground before being collected in deep aquifers, only to then follow a long path until returning to the surface loaded with minerals. The cycle can take up to 50 years. So we just drank rainwater from like 50 years ago. It's gone a long way, all right? But the quick eruption, the thing about this is it erupts super quick, and it allows the water to maintain both its gases. So the gases, like the pétillance, is natural, right? And it's high temperature. It comes out of the water at 60 degrees centigrade. So after having tasted it, you might, I don't know if you would be surprisingly, but its taste has, perhaps surprisingly, evolved in lockstep with Barcelona's brand. Who here has been to Barcelona? Who here wants to go to Barcelona? Yes, everyone, hands up. Okay, so Barcelona has itself become identified, right, with architecture and gastronomy, right? So I'm a freak for salty mineral water, and this one takes it right to the edge. Let's have some more. I love this water so much. I know Hélène, it's not her favorite, but I like it. So depending on your palate, it might not shock you that in 1890, the Spanish government recognized it as a medicinal water. And shortly thereafter, it began to be marketed in pharmacies, primarily as a digestion aid. Over the years, though, it moved into shops, and its symbolic link to the Catalan land and foodscape solidified as the water acquired its gastronomic element. That is, it became appreciated for its taste, not only its effects. Its rurality gave it authenticity, and its national aura continued to grow even more when it was declared the official water of the Barcelona Olympic Games, the ones that inaugurated the sort of hyper-mediatized spectacle that we've become accustomed to, with the enduring image being the diver in midair, with Gaudi's Sagrada Familia in the background. And I'm showing a slide of two chosen waters for the Olympic Games, and then also a slide of a diver with the Sagrada Familia in the background. Now, here's what makes Bici Catalan such an interesting text to study. With the rise of Barcelona as a world city, and one predicated on both architecture and gastronomy, Bici Catalan's subsequent use of the architect's trencadís. Has anyone here studied Gaudí? So the trencadís on the label, so I'll come back to that. But this trencadís, the broken, using the sort of broken tile Gaudí was a maniac for not wasting anything. And so he took broken tile, and that's how you could tile curves, right? And so you go to Barcelona, you see the trencadís style. So this trencadís style has been incorporated into the bottle, and you can see here this bottle has it on the glass, right? And afterwards you should come up and touch it, okay? And that actually won a global packaging prize, and it also consolidated a move to high-end urban tables and kitchens that had begun, this sort of had begun in the 1980s. We see here, this is part of the Mostra de Cuina Barcelonina in, this is late 70s, but even into the 80s, okay? What happens is Bici Catalan becomes cool, and it becomes a sought-out taste, right? A taste that is national from a Catalan perspective. Now, that this process has continued to the extent that the water now I mean, this is interesting because you have the Bici Catalan, but it is now being labeled for export markets as Bici Barcelona, okay? It's redolent of larger processes at work in terms of the relationship between the urbs and the rural. That it coincided with the beginnings of a culinary revolution that would see a modernized version of Catalan cuisine in many ways lead the way in terms of innovation cannot be overlooked. When considered in this light, the changing of the name invariably makes patent a new version of an old dynamic. Catalunya Ciutat, Catalonia City, Catalunya Barcelona. Vichy Barcelona thus helps us understand social and economic structures of a region through a unique approach to taste. And while traditional terroir could make a tentative claim here, in the relationship between the rural and the urban, the symbolic power of the metropolis imposes itself and lays bare a Barcelona appetite grown so voracious that it even needs to consume Vichy Catalan to aid its digestion. All right, and now I'll conclude. In her wonderful book, A Sensory Education, Anna Harris writes cogently and convincingly on both embodiment and enskillment in a multisensory context. She contends that, quote, one does not learn 5 senses, but rather that sensory education involves a sensing that extends beyond categories and organs. This involves the practitioner in an active engagement with their world as a living, breathing, multisensory and intersensory body amongst other bodies, end quote. Now, as she points out, while traditional notions of enskillment have revolved around manual proficiencies such as riding a bike or playing the cello, recent work has branched out and considered other sensory practices like capoeira, scuba diving, cooking. And I'm going to be cheeky and insist on the importance of this last one, especially as it relates to food studies in the humanities, and consider it an extension of my smelling ethos. Put more succinctly, if you can smell things being prepared, cooked, and or consumed, then you're on the right track. Which brings me to the manifesto part of my talk, where I return to the notion of perceptual enrichment. But this time, not only for learners, but also for teachers. As adult educators know, there can be no transformative learning without some transformational teaching. And here, kitchen sessions in humanities courses offer very, very fertile ground. Bringing students into a participatory, prepping, cooking, and eating environment has proven to be the most effective group activity that I've ever been part of. And I hate group activities. In those situations, recognizing the role of struggle in the student's adjustment to the new learning environment is important. We need to keep in mind that in addition to paying attention to the cultural text in question, whether it's a cuisine, a dish, a targeted smell, or smells, students are also having to deal with new technical vocabulary, new ways of physically being in space, hand washing, calling out if you're carrying a knife, alerting others how they're moving, like behind. Well, you've seen, what's the series? The Bear, right? You've all seen The Bear, so you all know how to work in a kitchen now. And work together to reach a totally different kind of goal than they normally might. And ideally, students will become part of generating the questions that we ask relating to culture in and around a kitchen as well. But what's the upshot? Why go to all this trouble? Why not just have them watch a video, right, on YouTube? Because, hey, you can learn a lot on YouTube. Sure, but you can't learn like this. By engaging our university students in the practical work that we normally identify with colleges and polytechnics, we can break down some very old assumptions regarding what is knowledge and what is valid academic activity. So by not just deferring to the virtual, but rather returning to primary source experience, like we've done briefly here today with perfume and water, I firmly believe that, as I said at the beginning, that we can activate ourselves and our students in new ways. In a moment when so many in the humanities are entrenching themselves, now is the time that we should be getting out of our comfort zones and embracing sensory experiences as tools for university-based learning. Food studies practically gift wraps this. And let me tell you, it's a great way to get out of your comfort zone. The first time I was going to do a solo kitchen session with Spanish culture students, I couldn't sleep the night before. And I can't remember the last time that happened because of a new text I was going to introduce in class. So let's upend the hierarchy of the senses in the humanities and smell and taste and do our part to contribute to transformations that emanate outwards with our students and ourselves at the core. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Davidson. We have time for questions. Who would like to ask a question?
Hi, thank you for the talk. I'm just wondering, kind of like a fun question, do you have like a favorite or least favorite scent and why?
Okay, well this is good. So the stuff I do, like I got into this through food studies, right? But then during pandemic, we weren't allowed to do any collaborative things. So I'm sitting at home thinking, oh, like the idea of how we communicate a taste for me is interesting. Some people think it's kind of flaky, but then if you've never had a mango, right, how do you tell me? If I've never had a mango, how do you explain? So there's something also philosophical there and physical. And then I started thinking, oh, it must be similar with perfumes, right? So I went down the perfume rabbit hole, and the house started filling up with samples. I smelled my way through the 20th century. Luckily, Ellen's nose is not overly sensitive, so she didn't complain, right? But I then had to sort of relearn. I actually had to, it was like learning another language, how to smell. And I've discovered, like, one of the most popular, if not the most popular scent or note is vanilla, right? Vanilla and baked bread are like two universal positives. The one universal negative is cadaverine, and you can imagine what that smells like, right? It comes from cadavers, right? So that is for humans, that is a negative. Personally, I like patchouli. I like some like rum and patchouli is good. I really don't like vetiver. It's a little too green. And Chanel Bleu, that was for me when I was younger. I can't do it anymore. Like, I don't know if it's a mix of memory. Well, scent and memory are so connected. I'm sure there's something bad in my past that happened when I was wearing that, but yeah.
Thank you.
My name's Ardesia, and my question is, do you think sparkling water should be given at the dinner table before regular water, or could it be replaced?
See, now you're getting into these are fighting words, right? So the thing about it's interesting because it depends where you are, right? And in Spain, a lot of Spaniards don't like cold water, right? So they'll have lukewarm water at the table, but this one has to be served cold, right? Otherwise, it doesn't stay. So I think I prefer it because I think it does help digestion, and also the thing about carbonation is that you get a sense of quenching, right? When you swallow something, something that really makes you kind of work for it, it's more quenching, right? So that's how I would do it, yeah.
Thank you. Were there questions here? Yes.
Hello. I was just wondering what's your research experience, or if you're currently...
Oh, for this?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically this is part of a book project called The Scent of Spain, right? Smell, odor, and culture in Spain. So I've broken it down into different parts. Fine fragrances, which is the history of perfumery in Spain. So the one we smelled today was from a small house called Mirugia in Barcelona. There's another big house called Puig, P-U-I-G, which has grown from being a small house in Barcelona to one of the world's largest perfume companies. They own Byredo, they own Comme des Garçons, they own Nina Ricci, right? And so now they've become, so I basically, by following these Barcelona houses and Gal in Madrid, I can follow the history sort of a perfumery in Spain. And because Spain was cut off from the rest of Europe for a big part of the 20th century, it's very interesting to see what smells, what local notes and botanicals were used. That's one part, but I'm also interested in functional fragrances. So that's cleaning products. When you go to a new country, you go somewhere and you smell the soap and it's different, or the cleaning, like the bleach or something, and then you smell it, you get a whiff of it, and you're instantly transported back to the Dominican or Mexico or wherever. So I'm looking at Spanish functional fragrances as well, which is hand soaps, but also cleaning products and detergents, right? And then I have a third section on hedonics, so pleasurable scents from the dark tobacco that Spaniards loved until 2006, when the new rules about smoking indoors came in. You used to go to Spain, you get off the plane, first thing you smell, heavy dark tobacco. But I'm going to read that as a connection to the colonial enterprise, because Spain and smoking, go back to Columbus, right? Like a cohiba, which we know as a cigar, the cohiba was actually a roll of tobacco leaves, right? And so Spanish, and then that all ties into the role of enslaved people in the plantations and things. But also I'm interested in the smell of jamon, the smell of red wine, the smell of olive oil. And then the last chapter will be on preserving and curating the olfactory past, because I mentioned that Spain has an inordinate number of little museums dedicated to smell. So I've been visiting them and checking out how they present these things, and so that's how this is tied into my current project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I had a question. What is the background on why you're researching about the smell? I mean, you kind of talked about it,
Yeah.
about like the different parts that you're doing, but
Yeah.
how did this whole thing
Well,
start?
Partly coming out of taste, and this colleague of mine, Dan Bender, and I, we work on this sort of idea of multisensory taste, and so we're really interested in that. And we did a thing called Scholars in Residence at U of T, which is like a month, it's like summer camp for kids who want to work on a project. So we started this project from zero and built it up into sort of thinking about taste in different ways. And then with my experience of thinking about smell that came out of the pandemic, kind of sort of forced out of the pandemic, that's how I got into that. And now I've been really, like, you see what happens, right? When you give smell and things people to taste, it does change the dynamic in the room. I can give you context, but you see how people just start talking, right? And the first time I had this Catalan agua lavanda, it's called. It's a lavender water, lavender cologne. And so it's the first time I was presenting any of this work, and I presented it to a bunch of Catalan specialists, but I handed out the sample too early, and no one was listening to me. They just started talking, oh, it smells like grandma, oh, I'm so happy, blah, blah, blah. And I have this wonderful line about this agua de colonia being a product of geopolitical olfactory terroir, and I was just waiting to drop that line, but no one let me, so I was very upset. But the thing that we're interested in, why we find it so compelling, is I mean it when we need to sort of do this. It changes how we think about the humanities, right? And it changes how we think about learning, right? By incorporating other senses. I just think it's important. Now, it's something I couldn't do earlier in my career because people laugh at you, right? Or people don't take it seriously. But now that I'm full professor, I have a named chair. I can do this, right? And this is why we need people like Rebecca, to help out in this, because I seriously believe that food studies is the future of the humanities, right? Because everything goes through food, right? If you want to talk about race, you want to talk about politics, you want to talk about religion, we can use food to go through there. And why not? The reason why not is because people don't believe it's serious, or they think you can't have fun, right? I'm all against no fun. I want to have fun. I want to enjoy. There's a question here.
Let's see questions over here. I want to make sure I'm not ignoring this side of the room. But all right, here we go.
Oh, we're good on time too.
How have your students reacted to your new take on teaching?
So I started teaching last year a course called the Spanish Sensorium, where we did 2 weeks on smell. I think they were kind of freaked out at first. And then we did taste, and so we tasted in class. For one of the assignments, they had to just smell and then taste some cheese and write about it. And I even, because I'm into the synesthesia, if they wanted to draw and their response to it, that's fine, like another thing. And then for hearing, I brought in a former student who's a flamenco dancer, and we sang, like she sort of did the sounds of flamenco, things like that. They've basically said that they've never had classes like this before. And if I can plug myself a little bit, my chair told me that students were commenting on my class in the evaluations of my colleagues in other classes, so that was good. But thank you for the question. It's a lot of work because it is different and there is no real support. I tried to get funding to take students to Barcelona so that we could smell in situ, but they turned it down, and I knew they were going to turn it down because fun, because enjoyable, because learning must not be that like that. Sorry, I don't mean to. Thanks for coming.
You talked about how the water is all natural, like the sparkling is
Yeah.
natural. Can you kind of go into like a little bit more depth with that and why that happens?
Okay, so because of basically it's like hot springs, right? So there's heat, there's hot water coming through, and just in the way that the geology works, and this is what makes this is why we don't have it everywhere, right? It takes the right mix of minerals, the right mix of land, and so what it does is the water's getting closer, these aquifers are creating pressure, and then it comes up and just close enough to the land where it will come out. So what was happening was it was seeping out. The story, for purposes of time, I cut out, there's like a really twee little story where Modest Fourest was like observing the sheep, because that's what you do, and he noticed this one group of sheep were so healthy, right, because they were drinking water from this one area, that he went over and tested the water. For sure, that's just a story, right? But they did find, and the fact that the Romans had, 1,000 years ago, had hot springs. So that's the reason. It's just because of the geological profile of that area that the water is so close that they can cap it, or they can tap it and bottle it right there. So they bottle it right where the spa is, because you can bathe in the waters, you can get the mud treatment, right? And that's why there's all these sorts of and what I'm interested in here is how it went from medicinal to being valued for taste. And so even if you don't like the taste, but I think we can show how, as part of the project of turning Barcelona into a gastronomic capital, this was part and parcel of that. But thank you for your question. I've never had so many questions after a talk.
Thank you for your for your talk, Professor Davidson. I'm just a guy that likes food, but I'm curious, what would you say are attributes of someone that wants to study food more in depth?
Oh, well, anyone, like, if you're interested in food, but if you're interested in taste, then that's a great reason to get into it, because then you're already open to the sensation, right? But then you can, what's your major?
Business.
Business. So then you can get into the there's all sorts of things on agro business, but even if you want to do hospitality, think about it from hospitality terms, right? The way that Barcelona's been branded. Like I said, you can use food as an avenue to get deeper into and to specialize in a way, because I think that this type of work, as we're sort of worried about AI taking our jobs, right, or taking different jobs in different fields, but the sensing and perceiving jobs, understanding how things taste, understanding how sensation works, that's going to be in demand, right? So I would say, yeah, just open up to that, but at the same time, also be open to reading about other things, reading about food and literature, food and politics, right? So you have awareness that when you go into, especially if you're going into business, that it's all ethically informed. Okay?
Thank you.
I love this job.
Hi, do you talk in your research any about how like we all smell things differently? I feel like I've heard that before, and how if I prefer a smell and she hates the smell, why does that happen?
Well, that's a great question. We still don't totally know how smell works, right? And for a long time they used vision, right, of how cones and rods and how we perceive light and all that sort of, they basically said, oh, that's how this works. And then there's the vibration theory of these molecules. We know where the senses are, we still don't know exactly how. We do know that smell is probably created in the brain, right? So because our brains are different, we're going to have different, but there are certain baselines of things that we can perceive. But because of smell goes through the emotion center of our brain, you may have an aversion to, well, not vanilla, but something, right, that another person's loves. So that can also condition it that way. But the short answer is we still don't know.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and while I'm here, I will tell you, because one of the things I've learned is how to apply perfume, because you know how in America too, right, there's a lot of scent-free zones and stuff, right? I think it's because people just sort of spray like this. If you want to keep it to yourself, just spray under your shirt here, and then it's all for you, right? Or spray your elbows or back of your knee. Take off your sweater and you can smell that it's warm. It doesn't always have to be, and don't rub. On the pulse points, don't rub it, just dab it. And if you want it to stay longer, you can add a bit of Vaseline, spray on a perfume, or spray your hair, or something like this. Actually, I have this fabric flower, and I was at the office one day, and a colleague said, "Oh, is it scented?" I'm like, "Of course." I ran right home and scented it, right, because I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, things stay longer on cloth.
If taste and smell are so subjective, then how is it that wine competitions are judged, or other food competitions?
That's another great question there. So, and this is very interesting, because what you see, especially with wine and things, is a disciplining of taste, right? So we are trained to appreciate things in a certain way, right? And if you go through, my colleague Dan, he got his diploma in wine, so he's expert taster. I like drinking. I'm not big on the structured tasting. I do it with my students, but it's but there is a disciplining of the nose and a disciplining of the mouth that comes with it, and people are basically forced into sort of categories to identify, alcohol content, identify the type of berry, So I'd say that part of it is very subjective, but when you get into a discipline like that, it is very, they try to make it more objective. Sophia? Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly right, because we don't have the technology, right, to transmit smell through the screen yet, right? I don't know if you know this, but there's Japanese researchers who are working on a lickable screen so you can taste, but I don't know if I'd want to do that. But basically what especially the big designers, right, the designer houses, they're selling you an aesthetic. They're selling you Johnny Depp, right, or whomever. So, oh, you want to smell like Johnny Depp? Oh, Sauvage, right? I don't know if he wears it, but they're selling you a lifestyle, and that's sort of the thing. What's interesting, Calvin Klein. So when the Calvin Klein, what's it? Oh, now it's escaping me. The one, is it one? CK1. When CK1 came out in the 90s, the ads were black and white of body parts. You couldn't tell whether it was man or woman. The whole thing about whether a perfume is for man or woman is totally arbitrary. Perfume, eau de cologne, eau de toilette are gradations of alcohol. But when I started this project, I found myself through just like sort of, the gendering of it. I'm like, oh, I don't wear perfume. I'm a guy. I wear cologne. But no, I don't. I wear perfume. And so now I've gotten better, but there is a definite gendering of it. So if you want to wear something that is coded female or coded male, who cares? If you like it, do it. But in that case, that was the beginning of this sort of unisex idea, and also with this obsession that America has with cleanliness and smelling like you just got out of a shower, right? The French, they don't want that. They want to smell dirty, right? Or sexy. But here there's this big push. And so this is also something that I find on the soap side in Spain with something like Sanex. Sanex gets big in the late 80s and the 90s. And so that is this chemical, like for me, it takes me back to my exchange in Spain. But now I smell it again, I'm like, oh my God, this is pretty chemically clean, right? Other thing I'll point out, if you like unscented detergent, laundry detergent, it's scented. It's just scented to be unscented. They spent a lot of money doing that, right? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll repeat it.
I know you mentioned previously about like a nostalgic memory, like a smell, like in the negative way, but in a positive way, what would be like a nostalgic smell for you? Because like for me, it would be like for example, like food being made like in my childhood. Like what would it be for you?
That's a great question. And sometimes when if I'm talking about the theme of home, right, with students, say in a film course or something, I say, oh, what's home? What is home for you? And they'll often say, oh, it's the smell of my grandma cooking, things like that. A nostalgic smell for me that I really like. Well, I do appreciate that soap, that sort of chemical soap, because it reminds me of the first time I was in Spain, right? So that's really nice. Yorkshire pudding, like kind of, which is its own special kind of. I don't know. Do you guys eat Yorkshire pudding here? It's like roast beef. It's like a British thing. It's like a little cake you make, little popovers. Anyway, that for me, I always had it on my birthday. So that kind of, but that ties right in with that kind of baked bread. The smell of freshly baked bread, which we all made during pandemic, right, is like, yeah, it's just like an encoded good smell. Yeah, thank you. How are we for time? Yeah, we're good.
All right, I think we're just about out of time, but let's give another round of applause for Professor Davidson.